My name is Clara Vance. I'm 38 years old, and I'm the CEO of Nexus Innovations, a company that, at the time, was valued at just over $90 million. The night my father called me worthless, the words came out like a sigh of exasperation rather than a shout, but they still landed with the force of a physical blow. We were at my parents' house for Sunday dinner, a rare occasion now that Nexus was consuming my life. My mother, bless her, had tried to make it a celebration, lighting candles and even opening a bottle of champagne she'd been saving. It was supposed to be about our Series B funding round, the one that pushed our valuation past the $90 million mark and secured our future. My father, Robert, sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of polite disinterest as I explained the nuances of our new supply chain optimization platform. Then, he cleared his throat, pushed an untouched roasted potato around his plate, and said, "All this digital fluff, Clara. It's not real money. You're still chasing dreams. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if you'll ever be worth anything substantial." My mother gasped, but I just felt a cold knot in my stomach. I'd spent years building Nexus from nothing, surviving on instant noodles and pure grit, all while he'd dismissed every milestone. I managed a tight smile, took a slow sip of water, and simply said, "We'll see, Dad." I knew in that moment that his words, his lifelong dismissal, would echo in a way he could never foresee. What I didn't understand yet was just how directly my hard-won success would collide with the very foundation of his carefully constructed world, and how his retirement, the one he'd always boasted about, would become collateral damage. To understand why his words cut so deep, you need to know Robert. He wasn't a cruel man, not in the way a villain in a story might be. He was a man of steel and concrete, a third-generation owner of a small but reputable manufacturing parts supplier. He believed in tangible assets, in things you could touch and see. From the moment I expressed an interest in computers, he saw it as a frivolous hobby, a distraction from real work. When I graduated with a degree in computer science, he suggested I get a job at the local bank's IT department, something stable. When I started my first small tech venture right out of college, he called it playing house. He had an old oak desk in his study, polished to a high sheen, where he kept a stack of leather-bound ledgers. These weren't just accounting books, they were his sacred texts, filled with meticulous handwritten entries detailing every stock certificate, every property deed, every dividend payment. He'd tap them with a proud finger and declare, "This, Clara, is how you build a future. Real assets. Real money. Not chasing pixels." He'd invested heavily in what he called bedrock industries, regional logistics, local manufacturing, and commercial real estate. He considered these bulletproof, immune to the whims of the market. He often told me he'd be able to retire comfortably by 65, living off the dividends from his sound investments. He was 62 at the time of that dinner. My own path was a constant rebellion against those ledgers. Nexus Innovations started in my cramped apartment, funded by credit cards and a small seed round from an angel investor who actually believed in my vision. We built software to streamline supply chains, connecting manufacturers directly with raw material suppliers and logistics providers through an AI-driven platform. It was complex, technical, and utterly invisible to someone like my father, who still did his accounting with a pen and paper. Every time I mentioned a new client or a successful pilot program, he'd nod vaguely and pivot to the latest news about his own investments, usually a new contract for Reliable Freight, a regional trucking and warehousing company he had significant shares in. "That's real business, Clara," he'd say, "moving goods, not just data." The first real crack in his facade appeared about a year after I started Nexus. We landed our first major client, a national furniture manufacturer. I was ecstatic. I called him, hoping for even a flicker of pride. Instead, he asked, "Are they paying you in actual cash, or just stock options for your little fantasy company?" I assured him it was a substantial cash contract. He responded, "Well, don't spend it all on fancy coffee. Try to save some for when this whole internet bubble bursts." That was his pattern, always a backhanded compliment, always a prediction of my inevitable failure. His dismissal fueled me, hardening my resolve to prove him wrong, not just for myself, but for every young woman he'd ever told to be practical. 2 years later, Nexus had grown to 30 employees. We were making waves in the industry, our platform cutting logistics costs by up to 20% for our clients. We were expanding rapidly, even starting to get attention from larger tech companies. Round this time, I overheard my father talking to my uncle at a family barbecue. He was complaining about the declining stock price of Reliable Freight. "These newfangled tech companies are driving down rates, John," he grumbled, gesturing vaguely with a hot dog. "They promise the moon, but they don't understand the cost of diesel or the value of a handshake." He still dismissed my company, but the market was starting to feel its effects. He just didn't connect the dots to my company. That detail mattered later. Nexus was quietly acquiring smaller, regional logistics software companies, integrating their data and networks into our larger platform. Our goal was to create an end-to-end solution that would make traditional, fragmented logistics providers obsolete. We weren't targeting Reliable Freight specifically, but they were definitely in our crosshairs as a type of business our technology would inevitably disrupt. I even considered approaching my father to suggest he diversify his portfolio, perhaps subtly warning him about the coming changes in the logistics sector. But every time I tried, he'd cut me off, launching into a lecture about my naivete and his proven investment strategy. The bound ledgers, he'd insist, held the true wisdom. The Series B funding round, the one that led to the worthless comment, was a pivotal moment for Nexus. We secured $25 million, pushing our valuation to $90 million. This capital allowed us to accelerate our expansion, including a strategic move into the very regional markets where Reliable Freight operated. Our new marketing campaign, Logistics Reimagined, highlighted how our platform eliminated the need for multiple intermediaries, cutting costs and delivery times dramatically. It was a direct challenge to the old guard, the companies my father had invested in for decades. It was about 2 months after that dinner when I truly understood the depth of his exposure. My mother called me, worried. She mentioned that Robert had been unusually stressed, checking his investment statements constantly. She let slip that a significant portion of their retirement savings, almost half, was tied up in Reliable Freight. Not just stock, but also a substantial bond holding and even a small piece of commercial property they leased to Reliable Freight as a regional hub. He doubled down on his bedrock belief, seeing the dip in Reliable Freight's value as a temporary blip, an opportunity to buy more at a discount. He genuinely believed that old-school logistics would always prevail. My heart sank. Reliable Freight was precisely the kind of company Nexus was designed to supersede. Their business model was antiquated, their technology infrastructure almost non-existent. We weren't trying to destroy anyone, but our platform's efficiency meant companies like Reliable Freight simply couldn't compete on price or speed. I pulled up Reliable Freight's public financial reports. The numbers were grim. Their revenue was declining, their profit margins shrinking, and their debt was climbing. They were hemorrhaging clients, many of whom were quietly switching to more efficient, tech-driven solutions exactly like Nexus. I realized then that my father's worthless insult was more than just a personal jab, it was a desperate attempt to maintain his worldview, to deny the very changes that were eroding his financial security. His pride wouldn't allow him to acknowledge that the frivolous tech he scorned was the future, and that his real money investments were built on sand. I considered trying to warn him again, more forcefully this time. But I knew it would be futile. He would see it as gloating, as an attack. He was too deeply entrenched in his belief system, too proud to admit he might have been wrong, especially to me. The decisive action wasn't a single, dramatic confrontation, but a business decision, cold and calculated, yet heavy with personal irony. Nexus had been approached by a global logistics giant, Omnicorp, which was looking to acquire a cutting-edge platform to revitalize its own operations. Omnicorp had identified Nexus as the market leader. The acquisition offer was substantial, valuing Nexus at $150 million, far beyond the Series B valuation. As part of the due diligence, Omnicorp analyzed the entire market, including struggling regional players. Reliable Freight was on their radar, not as a competitor, but as a potential asset to be stripped for parts, or simply absorbed for its existing client list at a rock-bottom price. During the acquisition negotiations, Omnicorp's strategy became clear. They would acquire Nexus, then use our platform to aggressively consolidate the market. Reliable Freight was identified as a prime target for a hostile takeover, or more likely, a forced sale of its assets, due to its mounting debt and declining market share. Omnicorp's plan was to acquire Reliable Freight for pennies on the dollar, integrate any salvageable assets into their Nexus-powered network, and then dissolve the rest. My company, the one my father called worthless, was about to become the engine of a market consolidation that would obliterate his sound investment. The acquisition of Nexus Innovations by Omnicorp went through 3 months later. It was a massive success for me and my team. We were celebrated, our technology hailed as revolutionary. The news made headlines in the business press. A week later, Omnicorp announced its aggressive market expansion strategy, specifically targeting inefficient regional operators. Reliable Freight was mentioned by name in an investor call as a company Omnicorp saw significant opportunities for restructuring within. The stock price of Reliable Freight, already low, plummeted further. My father called me, his voice tight with a rage I'd never heard from him. "Your company," he spat, "your damn digital toys, they've ruined everything. Reliable Freight is being bought out for a pittance. My shares, my bonds, they're practically worthless." The irony of his chosen word was not lost on me. He accused me of orchestrating it, of deliberately targeting his investments. He couldn't grasp that it was simply the tide of progress, a tide he'd ignored and scorned for years. I tried to explain that it was a market force, an inevitable outcome of technological advancement, but he wouldn't listen. "You did this," he repeated, "you destroyed my retirement." The aftermath was painful to watch. Reliable Freight was indeed acquired at a fire sale price. My father's substantial investment was decimated. The commercial property he leased to them was suddenly vacant, its value plummeting in a market saturated with empty warehouses. His carefully planned retirement, built on those bedrock industries, evaporated. He had to sell off other, smaller investments just to cover his losses and maintain his lifestyle. He didn't retire at 65. He continued to work at his manufacturing parts company, his face grimmer, his shoulders more stooped. He never spoke about his ledgers again. Our relationship became a strained silence. My mother tried to bridge the gap, but he refused to acknowledge my success, or even the existence of Nexus. He saw me as the instrument of his downfall, not the daughter who had simply built something valuable in a changing world. I didn't feel triumphant. There was a quiet, almost melancholic satisfaction in knowing I had proven him wrong, but it came at a steep cost. Sometimes, when I visit my parents, I still see the old oak desk in his study. The leather-bound ledgers are gone now, replaced by a single, slim tablet where he grudgingly checks the news. The world had moved on, and so had I. My company, built on the very digital fluff he despised, had soared, while his real money had crumbled. The irony was a bitter pill for us both.